to notice a rather rarefied atmosphere and to observe a high density here, whom I'm grateful, because the high density that we have on this podium actually invites us to try to speak briefly about cities of the future. But before doing so, maybe it's honest to ask, what is a city? And maybe each of us recalls when we were a child that a city was a name stated with enthusiasm, not knowing what it means. It was a first abstraction. We stated the name of our city, not being very precise on what it means. And later on, we related to that city with streets, with friends, with playgrounds, with the pride to go at the baker to buy bread by your own, where you were 5. And maybe a city becomes more and more appropriate if we actually knit and tissue and build memories. And I think that a city has such a diversity of actors, missions. Of course, a city is a topic of development for a planner. Obviously, a city is an area of electoral substance. It's obviously that a city might be also a territory of the unknown, of the possible. And from this, we can see that Italo Calvino had a fantastic way in the 50s, saying that a city is actually a planet because it is inhabited by people with similarities that might speak a distinct language, but mostly relate to memory in a special way. So I would like to open the discussion with this blunt question. What is a city for you? Let's share microphones.
Hello? Oh, it's open. Well, I will just throw some ideas because I think the twist on this question is, okay, how much a city influence who we are? Means, obviously a city is a place where we spend most of our time. The large population in the world lives in cities, and the forecast will be even more, and 80% by the end of 2030. So we're becoming a place where people stay longer, most of the population lives. And obviously it's related with a city for everyone is linked to your memory, your experiences in the city. So it can be very subjective, and I don't know, maybe different people can have different perception. As you can have different perception of, I don't know, like typical joke in Italy, French people are not nice. But then when I go there and I study there, I work there, I really enjoy it. So you have different perception. The same, if you live in a city, then you can have different perception of it. But the aspect I want to address is actually you are somehow molded as well by your environment. You are molded by the district you live, by the place you grow, the public spaces. And I think it's a binary relation. It means you have a memory of the city, but the city environment form as well personality, population, social classes. And I think as urban designer, we need to have that very clear. Because in some terms, I mean, maybe it sounds very dramatic, but social unrest, sense of injustice, social differences, not inclusion of society, it's economic factors, but as well are physical factors. If you live in a suburb without green, without social space, the only place you can socialize with your friend in an underpass of a highway or a train, which is dirty, dim, you are shaped by that experience of the real environment. So I think a city, to go back to your question, is something which is more and more important, which affects us all in the way we are, and we grow in society, and we become individual, a member of the society. And as designer of cities, we have responsibility to be aware of that and to offer solutions in which cities are inclusive, are enjoyable, they make people proud, they make people feeling safe, they make people feeling welcome. And as a professional, we have to find the tools to do that.
For me, a city is just a more dense collection of people. And that is a bit strange, because there's always the competition between a village and the city, like they are extreme different from each other. No, a village is open and is green, and you have some place to walk with the dog, and everything is fine and nice. And then you have the city, and the city is of course hard and grey, and we pull anonymous poles out from the ground until somebody says stop, and then all of a sudden you have a 200-meter tower or something. We don't understand the difference between a village and a city. The city is just more dense, but it should also be green, it should also be open, it should also be porous, it should also be social. No? That you know your neighbor. If you live in a village and you don't know your neighbor, no, there's something wrong. Why isn't the same applicable in the city? Well, there are people dead in an apartment for 3 months before somebody finds them, and then they say, like, yeah, I didn't know that there was somebody living there. Right? And we go up in this anonymous box we call an elevator. No, we don't even say hi because we are working with our phones. And then it spits us out somewhere, and then we sit. And then, until we leave. How is this possible? How is it possible that we don't look at the city in a more human way?
That's a super interesting remark, because I remember when I was in school in geography, you had to define what a village is, what a town is, what a city is, and the only distinction is population. So it was never, we are architects, so for us a city is a magical place of non-uniformity, of the unexpected, of dirtiness. Like, we're fascinated by the dirty part of the city, the dodgy part of the city, where things are dysfunctional. And yet, for us, these are fascinating. I always get into strange conversations with non-architect friends when we travel, because I want to go to very, iffy parts of the city, and they think that it's, why would we go there? Let's go to the nice square where it's beautiful, clean, and safe. So what a city is to us here, I believe, is very different to what a city is for non-architects. And then what a city should be, that's another question. But to really answer your question, I have no idea what a city is. I can tell you what it's not, but to answer what a city is mind-boggling, I think.
Just for us, I think a city are obviously for people, and I think the more we think about it, we want to bring a bit more nature into them. So it's not only for the people, it's also for nature. I mean, some city managed to retain that, but generally it's for people. And what we think, it's this, a lot of things happening at the same time as well. You have us coming here for the competition. You've got someone taking the bus, going to a conference maybe, someone going to pick up his kid, someone going to the grocery shop, someone just staying in his apartment, all of those things happening at the same time. And that differentiates it a bit from the village, I think. The village is a bit more static. There's things happening there, but here it's so layered. And I think the response, if you think about how we can maybe improve, is how to improve this connectivity and these layers coming together. So it's an interesting or pleasant experience for all of them, for all of us, as we live our lives differently. And to do that, I mean, there's certain scales to it. There's the immediate scale, which is the one that we always like to focus on, is trying to say, what are my needs within the close proximity? So I don't have to rely on transportation. I don't have to rely on taking a lot of time to get to certain places. It's having all my needs in the proximity. And that breaks down the scale. And that already creates a city. And from that point, it can grow and it can create clusters and individuality and all of those things. But for us, it's really this, it's the complexity of a system.
I think if a city is a platform for us humans to perform our activities, I think that gives naturally a huge gradient of variety of cities, right? And a city is not one thing. It's an abstract form of organization of societal functioning at the end of the day. And that gradient, I think, starts from a couple or a family, a community, a local one like a village, that then expands into a bigger community and then into a city and then into a country and so on and so forth, right? So the abstraction of organization can be defined by various policies as we define them. But I think that for me, a city to work well is a place where people know how to interact and establish rules which work for everybody and are inclusive. So at the end of the day, I think it's all about how well we know how to communicate with each other for a city to work well.
Looking to the future, I have a question. Actually, there is a collection of questions. But the current global context, we see it's unpredictable. We are under the pressure of an energy crisis, a climate crisis, of war, just recently, and the pandemic changed the way humans interact. The ever-changing social context leads to certain questions about the future, about the needs and aspirations of tomorrow. In this context, what does future-proofing mean, especially for urban design projects?
That's for me, right?
Not necessarily, for everybody.
Maybe it's actually like in a story, how much of the known and the unknown an architect designer might anticipate.
And this question in the future comes very often. And I don't know, and as a company, we always feel called in because we were often called futuristic. So what does it mean, this futuristic? So yes, no one knows the future, but the future of a city, well, the future of, I don't know, is this glass going to break or not? It's difficult. It's a simple thing, yes or no. The future of a city is not that tomorrow everything changes. Even the pandemic, it did change something. At the end, it accelerated something else. Some of those was predictable, some trends. It just accelerates some trends. So my point is, the future, one future action or result is unpredictable, but the future will not manifest as a complete change of what we know. And there are trends in a very globalized society, there are trends which start small and they become mainstream. There are expectation, there are social attitude, there are behaviors that they start as a, let's say, innovation, as a trend setting, as an exception that then become the norm. So in a way, the future is not so unexpected, as you know. And if you think, I don't know, let's take now the issue of sustainability. When we all work towards that, it's pressing. When you think when sustainability as an idea arises, it was when the first person went to orbit and look at the Earth from outside and look at it as an isolated piece of life within a universe which was cold and was empty, and realized there was a balance there. And that the sustainability conscience started decades ago. And for a time was like related only to a few groups, and maybe people was championing, was seen as, I don't know, like some kind of, let's say, moon people, or they were making prediction which will sound very negative. And little by little, this now is part of what we see in the future of the city. We need to be sustainable. We arrived to this situation after 20 years of debating, discussing, etc. So going back to the question, yes, future is unpredictable. But if you start with this assumption, you will never be ready for it. You have to start with the assumption, with the open eye, to see what's going on, what's important, what's coming up, what technology is bringing up, because that is new, and then embrace that, not resisting it, but seeing and trying to work with it and moving forward. This is usually an attitude of younger people than us, because their age is programmed to that attitude. When you get older, somehow you know your ways, you don't want to change it, and so you think of the future as something, a disaster. So I think we have to, and going back to the city, what's the future of the city? Maybe no one has a comprehensive response, but we see many of that trends accelerating, already there. We have to be sensitive to recognize, agile to incorporate in our way of working, and be prepared for it.
I completely agree with exactly what Gianluca said, and what I would like to add is the notion of flexibility. At least the way we have been working the past few years, in every project, we really try to say, okay, what if it's not what we think that will happen? What if something else happens? Yes, we have to be very sensitive to what comes from society and try to respond and try to predict. But, you know, the unexpected can happen. So flexibility, like incorporating it within the design and thinking that your design might completely change, might, you know, and allowing for that to happen, allowing one of your buildings to transform into something else, that is also a very important thing for future-proofing the future, in a sense.
If I can add to that, because it is extremely important, because how long do we have an iPhone? 10, 11 years, right? And many people don't know, but there was a completely different life before there was an iPhone. There was really, it was so strange, so that we can imagine what it's like in 10 years. It's not going to happen. We don't know. And this flexibility is extremely important, but sometimes the result is like an anonymous thing, something that can be everything. And that is something that we as officers try to fight. We want to give character to the building that we make, because in the end, that will determine whether it survives or not. Right? It can be super flexible, it can be anything, but it will be taken down because people don't feel that they love the building, that they want to be part of it.
I totally agree with everything that was said so far. I think the future is very positive because we keep learning, and maybe some things indeed got accelerated in the way we think about buildings, about places. But it's positive because we don't constrain ourselves. I think we're open-minded generally. All of the people here are open-minded, and also we saw it in the results of this competition. Everyone had a very in-depth analysis maybe of the entire city, the public realm, all that component, and has, I think, a very good approach to what enhancing the city means. So for us, I guess, or for me at least, it's really positive because we try to think forward, we try to become better and make the cities and the places we live better. I think to have a healthy city and a future-proof city, you also need infrastructure to add to everything that was said. You need the backbones of any good, we have our own infrastructure, it's our bones, it's our veins, the city needs it as well to build upon it. And I think this is always something that we don't see as normal people. It happens underground, it happens with the sewage system, it happens with the electrical, nobody wants to hear about it, but they make the city work. Also transportation is one of those topics. And I think the past few years are a bit of a danger for the future of the city, in a way that we have to make sure that people come back to the cities and they're not afraid to live in dense population, in a dense environment. I see that coming back, but I think there is a tendency of going back to suburbia, potentially even having everyone his own bigger space. And I think we need to encourage it by with green spaces and parks and the space that surrounds and encapsulates the buildings themselves, promote everyone to come back and to create this lively environment, because that's what the city is all about.
We should also learn from the past. The 20th century is full of examples of very ambitious urban approaches, from the zoning of the American cities where they're not livable without a car, which for us is a lesson not to do, to the 15-minute city now, which is something that is discussed, and especially after the pandemic, people really they have the opportunity to work at home, so now they really relish in the idea of only needing possibly 10-15 minutes to satisfy any possible need. So all these things, they evolve slowly, and for sure we need to look at the past and the way we address these issues and kind of see what worked, what didn't work, and plan for the future with a good, solid understanding, and not react.
I think a big part of future-proofing is the ability to predict things. So predictability, I think, is one key aspect that one would like, to be able to govern their own existence, future and development. And also, if we look at current context, you could say that a certain degree of autonomy is also something which future-proofing would need you to have implemented in a way or another. And that can be at city level, it can be at building level, right? And I think that's an important part of all that you build. And that can be done through all the technologies that one implements within a building, but also in a city.
Maybe just something I'd like to touch on is also opening with quite a positive thought that we have not to underestimate the human capability of self-adapting. Human beings have evolved a way a lot faster than any other species because we have a huge capability of self-adapting. And this is something that in the cities sometimes happens and generates new opportunities. We have been talking before about the importance of infrastructures, for example, within the city. I believe that in this historical period, for example, when we finally start thinking about cities that has been designed in the last century to be car-proof, and now we understand that actually cars are the enemy. So we are aiming and pushing all the energy to step back from that, right? And I mean, for me, as an individual, I feel it quite strongly because I had the luck to born in a very beautiful medieval small city, which is Siena, that is the opposite of a city designed to be car-proof, right? It was a nightmare because in the 70s you could still use your car in the historical center, right? And it was unlivable in a way. So the fact that now we are finally reversing this principle is also opening up to amazing opportunities for the city itself. So a lot of new developments in the contemporary cities are just on how to reuse or to transform infrastructures that are not necessary anymore. And again, it's a process of self-adaptation. So again, I believe that here what can come out as the most, allow me to say, obvious conclusion is that there is not an answer to this question, luckily enough. But there are a series of possibilities, understanding the present, trying to make assumptions about the future, trying to predict, but never underestimate that in any case, we are able to adapt. Even if we do a mistake today, we will be able to find the adaptation to that mistake tomorrow.
So you cannot just break future-proofing into certain ingredients and hope that applying them in every project, the outcome would be the same.
I'm not saying that designing a city doesn't have to be thought with ambition of being future-proof. But again, if we had having the capability of being 100% future-proof, that means that we could read the future and would make everything pretty boring, honestly.
So it's not like retrofitting. It's not that easy to explain technically, maybe.
No, I was about to summarize for myself that maybe future-proofing would invite us to visit what was before with a different conscience. Maybe we need to avoid mistakes and to really name them and explain them. Maybe we also need to nuance that human presence wasn't a pollution to Earth. And maybe we need to distinguish that there is a huge difference between being sustainable and being conscient sustainable. People were always sustainable. They had a resource, they had limits, and they behaved in a sustainable way. So maybe this nuance about the poetry of looking at Earth and seeing a huge blue bubble that might extinct has an impact on nearly zero energy building, but also has a smile on our face because people built responsibly for a long time. No? So I think that from this round of future-proofing, I retain at least 3 important elements. The dream to know your neighbor. It's a reiteration of vicinity. The pertinency and accuracy of sustainability, and also avoiding what we thought it was good and meditated for, and we found out it's highly inappropriate and lived badly. Întrebare.
Well, in regards to what the city of today has to offer, and in talking about shady neighborhoods, less desirable areas, well, so far it seems we cannot talk about the future without mentioning the past. So, incidentally, the built past holds potential in helping reduce carbon footprint using the built environment, the already built environment. How will this existing realm fit in sustainability of future cities and, I don't know, the efforts of resilient programs such as the Paris Agreement? How does the already constructed fit into this? Because maybe I'm thinking somebody has different strategies of retrofitting, stuff like that.
I think retrofitting is a very good topic. We see it in the city here, but all the cities have that issue. There's a huge built fabric that needs to be retrofitted or rebuilt. Of course, retrofitting makes much more sense in terms of, and refurbishing generally in terms of your footprint, and also in terms of sustainability, building sustainably, because the construction of a building and also demolishing of the building is putting is having a big impact on that. So I think us as offices, we have to embrace that even more. I think we're working as much as we can with older buildings, and they're great examples of repurposing buildings. And I think that would also help bring life back to the cities. I think particularly Iași is one of those. It has a lot of old fabric from the communist era. I think there's great examples on how you can refurbish and repurpose them, also into residential. It has been done in East Germany, for example, great projects, and there's a chance here as well. I think the demolition is not the solution in this case.
It seems that more and more, a larger part of our work will be retrofitting and repurposing, because all of our cities need to be, let's say, our built fabric needs to be beefed up in terms of performance, in terms of providing spatial quality, in terms of responding to future needs, and we cannot just demolish everything. That doesn't work.
I mean, this is a very important point, and working in very different geographies obviously depends on the country and the demographics. So if you work in China, obviously they're building a lot of volumes now, so the focus is how to make that sustainable. But in Europe, on other geographies, the existing stock, real estate stock, is much more of what you can build every year. And as designer, obviously, we are focused on project. So our, let's say, we can make an impact on project we design, but there is overwhelming existing stock of housing, offices, which can be solved rather by policies and not by designer. And every country is doing their own initiatives. There are tax advantages, there are relief, there are initiatives. But it's not properly a design response, because it's a very wide action. And clearly this needs really faced by institution, policies and government in upgrade the existing residential block, the existing housing market. So that is it's a slow process. What I will say that as office, we always, when client called, and maybe they have existing buildings and they want to do something new, we always advise them to keep what they have, because clearly to demolish and rebuild per se on the few-year construction has a carbon impact, which is very high. So we always advise that. Sometimes the client, they get slightly irritated about our response. They say, no, we called you because we want something new. We always say, look, just keep what you can keep. We can retrofit, we can refurbish in a beautiful way. But that said, yes, I think your response, your question generate a response can be addressed at the government and policy level.
And it needs examples, right? Also for clients who think that they get a new building, you need to show in examples of, but this is what it can be like. And also here the communist buildings are part of that. No, the first time we drove there, we were like you, looking like, oh,
playground.
That was a nice one. And we know that culturally people don't like it because it's a lot of concrete, it's a solid, massive bunker, but it has so much potential. And
you should see our industrial district.
yeah, exactly. And if you get good examples, then people start to see also the added value of refurbishment, and because it is much more layered than just a new building.
So it makes huge sense to try to convince local authorities about developing their own strategies, or maybe with some big firms' help.
Yeah, also adding to this, because we hit this not problem, opportunity, I would say, in London, where certain building couldn't be demolished because the authorities decided it doesn't make sense to build something new, which is a really positive move. And I think that if the municipality here or the departments that are in charge actually manage to control this process as well and limit the amount of maybe unneeded demolition, than to retain the existing fabric. I think that's very important.
I believe that your set of thoughts touches a very sensitive truth that sometimes the future that we face, it's so near, and the length of a policy, it's very slow. So we live in a time where changes are touching us, and we embrace them, we try to anticipate them, to behave as designers, but we need to work in a rather very slow, rigid legislation and reglementation framework. But the good thing is that common sense on retrofitting, it's a very good mediator. It's what's the point of spending money until we have something already. That's a first, let's say, positive hint. Another aspect which maybe we need to take in account, it's a perception. Because, for instance, you may retrofit a building with a very low budget, but if the building is perceived as being an enemy of the city, or a gesture of imposing something. So let's try to speak not only about buildings and images, because being architects, we have this fabulous paradox. We always talk about what I built, what I suggested, but we actually offer emptiness, spaces. Of course, they are in a skin, in a built skin, but it's the void that we anticipate in terms of scenarios, possibilities, and things like that. And I would like to ask you, what do you think cities, your city, the city you live in, will look like in 10 years?
Maybe it's not about how we think any city will look, but how any city will have to look, and they will have to be greener. As simple as that. And maybe in this we can also tackle on this exercise of being able to be future-proof, right? So in this specific historical moment, I believe that, a line has been traced quite clearly on the direction that has to be taken quite urgently. And of course, even though, again, I agree on highlighting that, it's good to have responsibilities, but it's, in a way, likely enough, it's not only responsibility of the architects, because it's, the complexity of the cities, it is such that is really, cities are the result of different level of economical, political interest, etc. Our contribution has to be, as designer, as urban designer, has to be aware of this line and try to follow it, to embrace it as much as possible, and a step more than what is possible.
Do you remember that when you were a kid and you would go to get an ice cream and you had this choco dip? You remember? That was the best thing that you could have as a kid, at least not living in Italy where you have proper ice cream. But if you had the cheap one, the choco dip, that was it. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we take a city and we do this green dip and we put it back?
Yeah, I think, look, as architects, we were joking, we always work a bit in the future because all our projects are built after many years, sometimes after 10 years. Sometimes we work on them, we cannot show it to anyone for, I don't know, many, many years. Either confidential, or it's a competition, or they don't want to publish it. So I think as a group here, quite a lot of us are working already in the future. And by the time the thing is built, it's already past for us. So you have to ask us, how do you imagine the next 50 years, not the 10 years maybe? Because the next 10 years, we already have drawn probably.
Yeah, in a way, I really like this thought, because, in a way, sometimes the future is a little bit our past. Right? So, just by quoting another Italian joke as a way to say that, I'm so protracted towards, I'm going so fast that if I look in my rearview mirror, it's the future.
From everything that has been said, I get the feeling of optimism from everybody of you. And I totally agree, we have to embrace change and rely on the human capacity to adapt to everything. But in this regard, and starting from architecture, design, but also urban process, should we think of an open-ended design for our cities?
A city is by definition an open-ended design.
Yeah.
I think of cities that are new, that they are not cities, they're not yet. Example, Canberra, Australia, one of the youngest cities. it is not a city yet. It doesn't have collective memory yet. It doesn't have the layerings. A city is alive, you know. It has to grow up. It has to become an adult, then, you know, continue on into geriatric years, and then become a baby again. And it's a cycle, but it's alive. So.
And if you want, this opens also an interesting consideration with regards of history, for example, because again, myself being Italian, I mean, some Italian cities, they have a so strong and important historical architectural heritage that at some point they just become museums. They're not cities anymore. They just display themselves, which to me sounds quite dangerous, honestly. Again, you could, I'm not entirely sure if we could still define those as cities. Not just piece of art that you go there. I mean, sometimes it might be necessary, sure, but it's also a bit dangerous.
Well, that's a very good example, right? Because perfect cities were Italian-born, right? But they're kind of a thing of a past, because those were the need of defense. And, well, one likes to think that we don't need that anymore in that sense, right? Or at least we have other means of providing that. So a city, at the end of the day, is a living organism. So how else, except for an open-ended design, you know, can one think of a city? There is no other solution, is there?
Yeah.
I mean, the city itself is an ongoing project, obviously, and we have to accept that. As well, he has some rigidity, because obviously we're speaking of physical street, physical building, but there is another side of it, that the use that we make of cities and physical structure. We are getting more freedom now because of new way of living and technology. And this has opened up possibilities. So you can work from everywhere, and all our offices, they have people working from home or from abroad or from the hotel room. You don't need to commute as much that you used to. So all of this, you don't need to go to a shopping center, you can just order online. So this is adding some degree of flexibility how you use existing urban fabric, which is quite important. So a remote village, which is dying, maybe it can be brought to new life because of possibility of technology. So I think it's, we have to accept that there will be always changes. But I think, yeah, I fully agree with my colleagues that, yeah, we all approach the city as something which we don't pretend to bring to perfection, because it's too complex and it's ongoing and it's inferior and always changing. But I think, yeah, we have to do what we can when we are called to, always in the right direction. I mean, it's not important if you arrive there, it's important to steer the right decision.
I will try to explain what I visualized listening you. If we try to explain to someone who's not an architect what anticipating future might be for a designer in an open-ended territory as a city, it's like as simple as you want to catch a tram or a train, and you need to run to jump in. So the city, it's a moving entity. So unless you fine-tune your speed to jump in, you can't perform good design. This is visually what we do.
Yeah. Right.
I think you all agree.
Definitely, it's a beautiful metaphor.
It's very simple.
It is, yeah, right.
I would like now to touch a very not necessarily sensitive or debated topic, but a very real one. Differences in housing, offices, streets, cars, lighting, clothing. are becoming less and less specific. So there is a process of, let's say, not necessarily dissoluting identities, but feeding in more diversity in all our living environment. And the question is, the question that I would like to raise is that, do we need character and identity? What's the fingerprint? What's the theme? How we address this?
Can I pass you talk about diversity, and again, there's the white man without hair talking a lot.
Maybe one of you.
Unfortunately, we only have 8 these.
We need to start. You don't want to start?
So it's about recognizable and unrecognizable. It's about mnemotics. It's about maybe a tradition that it's not a picture. It's a tradition that you wear in yourself. It's like a DNA. It's like a scripting. In this sense, I'm trying to open the discussion.
Well, I think any image that we create for ourselves or for other people, or it's a form of having, or it's a form of us identifying with something, right? Being that a group or a collective or a city or whatever else. And I guess your hint was at cultural identities of groups in cities, and the remark with clothes not being specific, I think that it's actually increasing in specificity, but just in different identity groups. Because in the past, if we think of, we always go back and look for, as we were looking for references for the presentation, and like what's specific of Iași from tradition and past. And of course, you can find traditional clothes, and you can find patterns that identify a community, and you can find all of those in the past. But that's going back 500 years, right? But with people being able to communicate and to travel and to know more and to explore more, obviously also needs and wants of people become diverse. And then maybe we choose to identify to different kinds of groups, and not to a country or a region, but to, I don't know, music groups or to other type of social groups, right? So then that maybe becomes the stereotype. And I think that those stereotypes are much more than what you could find in the past. And I think there's a richness in that. And yes, you do need a visual icon or identity, almost like, let's say, a semiological means of diversifying and identifying places so that you know and are able to navigate yourself in this complex world. Because if everything would be the same, we, I think, would lose our human character at the end of the day. Because the beauty of it is that we are all diverse and we have thoughts, and we decide to, grab specific thoughts and make our own soup out of it, right? In a sense of creating our own identity. And I think, yes, those images are very important to us creating our own identity. And in architecture, it's, I think, a very important part of how we do things. And that's also why maybe people don't, relate to the building that you present in the way that they expect to. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Because the unexpected is the thing, I think, which we should all aim to create.
Yeah, just a thought about maybe more tailored around architecture and thinking about this project more specifically, because you've asked, or it's been asked for international offices to come up with a solution for a location right in the city, which would fit in probably. But the question is here, what is, for example, modern Romanian contemporary architecture, for example. So what would fit in from this point of view? And that's very hard to answer because it probably doesn't exist as a style or anything. So we have to accept influences and thoughts, ideas, maybe that come from other places that can supplement and maybe enhance the character of the place. It should definitely not take away from what is here valuable. And similar to that, as in architecture, is with everything else, as Bogdan was saying, I guess.
You could think of Iași or any city as a collective story, like something that the people that live there or know it, or they agree that that's Iași or that is London, or that is, it's a common understanding, a shared myth, if I may say, of what is a city or a place, or what Bogdan said. It could be anything, not just the city, like a shared understanding of belonging somewhere. And that evolves, it's not static. So the story is it's open-ended, as cities are open-ended, but it's an open-ended story, and things could be added to it, buildings could be added to it, spaces, public spaces, infrastructure, it changes. It doesn't mean that it changes. it evolves, you know.
I think I'm related with the theme of imagery and memory and, let's say, belongings. I think we should stress as well the value of diversity in cities. And let's say, if you look at a city like London, where you may have an iconography of the Queen and the boulevard and the building, the palaces. Actually, the city is the great city it is because the diversity of the population, of influx, of immigration, of culture, the fact that there's not a policy or a pressure to unify to things, but actually, in general, people seeing that as a richness, even older people or maybe more conservative or traditionally, that is seen something good, that we have the option to go to a certain neighborhood which is completely different in ethnic mix and cuisine, and that is widely accepted. And many of the great cities in the world actually are built by immigrants, a melting pot of different places. Even historical city like this one, you see what's the heritage. The heritage is different religion, different period, different settlers, invaders, and now we see the back and we see, oh, that's the corpus, that's the identity, as if it was one, but it's actually many, many identities. So I think as well, when you approach city, I think we have to do as well with a fresh eye to accept diversity, both in the, let's say, social, but as well in terms of architecture, in terms of solution, public spaces. I think otherwise things may get very, very boring, very flat, and they don't do a good service, I think. And again, this is a question of policy, how to foster that diversity, how to attract that energy, and how to be inclusive of everyone.
Which, if you want, brings also back to a quite interesting organic comparison. We've keep saying and repeating that at the city, at the end of the day, I mean, cities are also organisms in a way, and as much for any species, like a concept of genetic pool is never successful, but is contamination that allows for, and differentiation that allows for a better adaptation, again, and growth and development. So.
I try to imagine what if a painter or a blogger or a vlog or an artist manages to find a way to illustrate a sum of people's feeling, very diverse people living in a city, and the way they feel it's about belonging to a place and belonging to the city. And I was questioning what would translate, what would mediate, what would be touchable in terms of belonging representation. How you can, it is immaterial, but how could you illustrate it? Belonging.
I'd like to be that artist, honestly.
I'm just going to try something, I guess. It's a very tricky question, I guess. But if you think of belonging, you associate an image which you create of a place, right, to an experience. So I guess that kind of sums it up. And then from that, I guess you have a responsibility to create that image through the means which you have at your disposal. We as architects, by designing that place in such a manner to create the opportunity for the experience to happen. To offer, yes, the possibility for that experience to happen. And then obviously it's up to your ability to read that community or the potential of that community to behave and to perform within that space, right? And then there's obviously a discussion of the quality of that space by its diverse offering, by its size, by the type of community it addresses, and so on, right? I guess that's the way in which you could paint a picture as an architect of a memory.
Broadly speaking, belonging is a positive term. We want to enhance that. We want people to recognize themselves with the environment and feel accomplished and at ease. But you can push it as well to a negative meaning, which I belong in a white middle-class community. I don't want to see immigrants around here. And so it's a fine line which, between belonging and be open-minded and inclusive. So I think we have to, I don't know, this is a very profound social policies, cultural sensibilities. I mean, it's a bit out of the domain as an architect. But in general, I will say we should be aware that not necessarily we have to repropose always the same thing and to be homogeneous and to do what people expect and has been done in the past, because the belonging is mostly what you have in the past or your aspiration to be. And to some extent it's positive, to another extent it can be negative. So I think it's good to have a society in which people feel at ease and not put to the limit or uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's good to have a society where everyone is comfortable, not only the majority. If you don't belong to the majority, then you're an outcast or something. So I think it's a complex question. I just say it may have different angle.
It's creating emotions and feelings that link you to a certain space, maybe to memories, and those help you develop this belonging to a certain place. But it's very difficult to quantify that, or even harder to express it afterwards. So we tried something years ago with it was like a space helmet. One of our colleagues had it fitted on his head and was moving around the streets of London. It was measuring his brain activity, pulse, a few parameters. And whenever, it was interesting, he just walked around in the proximity of our studio, went across the river, suddenly the energy bursted because he saw something exciting. Moved around the corner, went to a very busy street in London again. Similar action. So you can possibly monitor that, predict it in a way, but what the painting actually does, it's another question.
One of the first things a child will draw will be, with little lines, will be a little boy or girl holding his or her parents' hand. So I think our first primal sense of belonging will be belonging to our family or to a community or to belonging with other people somewhere. So yeah, if I were to draw a picture of what belonging means, would be that, what a child would draw. And
I agree. I was thinking of the same. What I feel as belonging is beyond the built environment. It's your friends, your family, that's your social interaction. And that's what makes you belong in a place. And of course it has to do with your surrounding, but because that's what draws people to a place. But what draws us to Romania, to Bucharest, is always our parents, of course. Yeah, and that's what ties it in. But that's how I think we found that, I think personally, just to put it out there, is Stuttgart, for example, also we felt like we belong, maybe because we were both together, or London as well, because you have always that place sense that you feel at home somehow because of your friends and because of your family. I think that's...
Thank you very much for all your answers. I was trying to put light on the idea of feeling nurtured, cared, confident, and being caressed. It's like being a child, and someone takes care of you. And maybe belonging starts with this being at ease. You know, it's not only that you want to relate or to name mother or father. It's an experiment, it's a state, it's a feeling, it's confidence, it's growth, it's also movement. So to end, I think that our discussions maybe needs to be developed on, but I'm very confident that all your designs and all your shared convictions have this type of care. I'm confident, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.